After months and months and months of planning, we finally arrive at Bench Boost 37. And whether you're on a Bench Boost or not, I have everything you need covered. So consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video, and let's solve your problems. Right, now let's start with Spurs, and who I think, alongside Manchester City, are probably the most important team of the double, because this is really where the opportunity is. And you'll see where it lies with City, but this is where I think probably the biggest opportunity out of all the double game week teams lies. So I know I've got assets to consider here, but really Son should probably be a lock, right? Penalties, 90 minutes, the responsibility he takes on the pitch, how good of a player he is, the ceiling, his record, for example, a hat-trick against Burnley in the reverse fixture, etc., etc. For me, he's my favorite FPL asset ever, and for many of you, it will be the same, right? So with him, I think he's a lock. So it's really about selecting two Spurs assets for the last two spots out of the four mentioned. And I think, like I said, this is where the opportunity lies due to the fixtures primarily and just the way Spurs play. That, honestly, this triple up should be non-negotiable. So with that in mind, how do we go about picking the last two? Well, a common theme about this bench boost has been defensive problems, right? The back seven just don't look particularly strong because of the set of fixtures for the double game week teams. Thus, with Spurs having a decent fixture against Burnley at home, and even with Man City at home, that's not ideal, but Porro and Romero both have attacking upside. I'm very much in favour to go for one. Now, which one? I'm quite indifferent between the two. I think Porro, obviously, you get the set-piece threat in terms of the fact that he takes them, but you also get the open play threat, whereas Romero, you get a direct goal threat from set pieces, and he is by far their biggest threat in the box when Spurs are whipping the ball in. So with that in mind, it's very much personal preference. For me, personally, I go Pedro Porro. I think he'll be slightly better on the bonus point system, and the fact that he's got more avenues as opposed to just heading the ball from set pieces. But like I said, corners, free kicks, open play, advancements into the final third where he crosses or shoots, things like that, they edge me to go Porro's way. So given we're going Porro, not just because we need him for our structure, just the structure and the landscape of FPL at the moment, but also the type of player he is, we can only go for one of Richarlison or Maddison. Now, all I would say about Maddison is that if you have him, I wouldn't sell him for Richarlison. I think you're likely to have other problems in your teams. With Spurs being so poor in their last two games, and they were incredibly poor before the 60th minute against Liverpool at least, I think he was benched for both of them. I personally think he should have started both of those games. I think stylistically it would have made sense to start him. But now that that's happened, I think he definitely gets a nod for these two games, at least in 37. And given the expected minutes are good, given he'll play further forward, I think you keep him. There's not really worth, 4 points or a transfer to switch him to Richarlison. Saying that, I've been waxing lyrical about Richarlison last week, the week before, and I'm going to do it again. The image here that you can see is his threat at 9, right? Like, first of all, this was a fantastically taken finish, right? It wasn't an easy finish, and he did very well to just lift it past Alisson. But not only that, Son didn't even really get into these positions throughout the 60 minutes that he was playing up top, whereas Richarlison caused the centre-backs a lot of problems initially, right? And I spoke about this last week. He can occupy two centre-backs very, very well. He can bring them in, and when he drops in, because of his physicality and able to link, difficult to stay with him. And then he can also take you the other way because he's got good speed going in behind, and he knows how to use his body. He's intelligent, and he's got a good positional sense, right? So I really think with all those reasons, plus the things I've spoken about in the past about how Postecoglou likes him at 9, that he's going to start both the games against Manchester City and Burnley as the striker. His expected minutes will be pretty good given some of the really poor performances in the Spurs squad prior, and he'll generate a lot of threat for Spurs and thus FPL points for managers potential. So I really, really like him. He's probably my favourite differential of the lot, but given that Maddison has decent upside, I wouldn't sell him, but this would probably be one I look at. For example, a lot of people have Bruno Fernandes, right? And I think if you've got Bruno Fernandes, given there's uncertainty around his minutes, United are in really poor form. The fact that their fixtures are at home, I think, helps. But I would really consider the move to Richarlison. So for me, it would be Son, Richarlison, Porro. And I think just having that structure of two midfielders, one defender, kind of perfect in this. Moving on to the team very likely to be crowned Premier League champions once again, we're going to move on to Manchester City. And again, for me, here, the pool of assets isn't particularly big. And I've actually got a really strong preference over which three I think are the best. And I'll explain why. So firstly, we've got Haaland. I mean, he scored 4 goals against Wolves. That's pretty much all you need to know. He's got 25 goals this season. The lock, naturally, and he will be for so many people. We're going to speak about captaincy later and if you can pivot and if that's an intelligent way to take a risk. We'll speak about that later in the captaincy section. I've got a bit of individual analysis for certain players against certain teams who could be casted as differentials to go against. So, naturally, Haaland's a lock. Then we've got 2 spots for Foden, Gvardiol, and De Bruyne. Now, here is the way I see it. That image on the left-hand side is a left-back who's traditionally a centre-back popping up outside the box and striking it really well to score. And it's not just that he's done that and had that one moment, but he has been incredible. He has been so good. His technical ability for a centre-back playing at fullback is phenomenal. The way he's so dynamic in this role, the way he can do so many things. I'm sure his passing at long range, short range, his movement, his crossing, his shooting, his positional sense, the way he interacts on the ball with his teammates is fantastic, right? And he is looking to be a top player and worth every penny of the millions they spent on him. So with that in mind, and as we've discussed so many times, the defensive structure of FPL squads not being particularly strong, for me, he is the best defender, and thus it far outweighs having 2 and double Manchester City mids, but rather I'd have Josko Gvardiol and shore up the structure of our squad, and also you're getting an asset with a very high ceiling, which therefore leaves us with Foden or De Bruyne. Now, I said I was very clear on which were my preferred 3, and for me, it's Phil Foden, because not only is he cheaper and is he better for your squad structure because you can reinvest the money elsewhere, but he's in better form. His goal-scoring threat has probably been there more, and the main thing for me is his ceiling. Now, we can come to expect in minutes, and our Foden's is probably better than De Bruyne's, but for me, it's really the ceiling. Because he's the one who's probably going to score a brace, and it's not De Bruyne. Now, I use this image on the right, and it's more I'm using it as a metaphor to kind of show you what I mean, as opposed to like a certain part of analysis in the game. You can see both Foden and De Bruyne exactly level with each other as the 8s. And I think given Foden's increased responsibility in terms of output, in terms of that final third, in terms of his ability to flourish there, and the responsibility Pep's given him, De Bruyne is transitioning more so back to an 8 again, as opposed to the second striker role he played last year. And thus, I have no concerns whether Foden can go punch for punch with him and even knock him out in terms of output. So for me, Foden, Haaland, Gvardiol. The only reason I would go De Bruyne is if you're taking a risk. The only reason I would go De Bruyne over Foden is for a risk. The only reason I would go triple City attack and leave Gvardiol out is for a risk. Maybe you go Gabriel, Saliba at the back, right? You go double Arsenal defense, hoping to get a headed goal from a corner. And you also go De Bruyne for the upside that they score 10 goals in the double game week, as an example. But I would not do it based on logic. Logically, I think Haaland, Foden, Gvardiol in that order is probably the best trio you can get. Moving on to the red side of Manchester, we've got Manchester United. And this is a little bit more difficult. In fact, it's significantly more difficult, right? I'll start at the back, and we'll go to this picture first, because this is a snapshot of the game against Palace, where Elise scored their opening goal, right? And it's just an image which really doesn't reflect well on them. Casemiro gets dropped. Kobbie Mainoo at 6, who probably isn't fully physically developed. Well, he's definitely not physically developed, right? His maximum potential, although a brilliant player, simply due to his age. And thus, Elise running rings around him. Look at the space that is left. Look at where the centre-backs are compared to the full-backs. Look at it. It's just not great, right? There's just a lot of things that are categorically wrong with this, right? And Elise punishes them. And a lot of this, I actually think, is not only due to the injuries in terms of defense, but also Bruno Fernandes to take the ball, take responsibility. The lack of threat going the other way kind of takes away from Palace's need to defend. They could probably be a bit more aggressive with their press. They know they're not going to get played through, right? And if Bruno Fernandes isn't there for Arsenal and Newcastle, well, Arsenal and Newcastle could score goals, right? And a lot of them. And that's kind of the point. The reason it's difficult is because, as I've mentioned so many times, there's not that many good defensive options in the double game week. And if you've already got Onana, and if you've already got Dalot, where else do you go? Because realistically, you'll already have triple Chelsea, triple Newcastle, triple Spurs, triple Man City. That's already like 12 players. Yeah, sure, you can go sideways and get an Arsenal asset, but they've got one less game, and that too, it's away. And Old Trafford is a type of place where it's not that easy to keep clean. Not a lot of teams go there and keep clean sheets, right? And if they do, it's never particularly easy. So with that in mind, and the fact that Dalot's got a decent ceiling, and so does Onana, because of one, save potential, can accumulate a lot of saves and face a lot of like mid-level XG shots. For example, Elise's second goal should be saved, in my opinion, and Dalot going the other way going forward. As much as you probably don't want him, I think it's the really classic case of don't buy, because why would you? But don't sell either. And I don't really see the point in selling. I think some people have been discussing that, but for me, it just doesn't make much sense. Garnacho, I would try and ship out, though. I think there's so many good double gaming assets in the midfield and the forward line that we'll come on to in a later section, that I just don't really understand the need to keep him when he hasn't looked particularly threatening recently, and just their patterns of play have been poor. So him, I would sell, and I would look to get in like an Anthony Gordon, because roughly is similar price, but there's only about 0.8 between them. Then Bruno Fernandes, as I've discussed, I really like Richarlison. There's a template midfield, right, and it doesn't include Richarlison. So if you wanted to break that, I would move Bruno to the Brazilian. Reason being is if he hasn't trained, you don't really want to be going to the double game week where other people are going to be having a 9 of a Spurs side whose focus of their system is to get the ball to their 9 and then the end of chances, in comparison to a guy whose minutes are very uncertain, playing in a side that, well, you just never really know what you're going to get. So for me, I would say it's pretty simple. Don't buy, don't sell any of the defense, but I would be offloading the midfielders. I've spoken at length about why I think Isak and Gordon are the best assets to own from Newcastle for this double game week. Their fixtures are very attacking orientated. They have been in the past few weeks as well, and they've returned as a result. And I think this trend will continue. So for me, those two, again, locks, and just they form part of a very stable template for a reason, right? The question is where to go on your third asset. Now, for me, it's Dan Bird. Security of minutes, some goal threat from set pieces, and he's cheap, right? So he allows you to make other moves maybe in 38 elsewhere. For example, like upgrading to get Salah in 38, as an example, because we can't just focus on 30, right? My issues with Livramento, Trippier, and Wilson are all expected minutes. I have no idea, and to be honest, most of us don't have any idea what condition Trippier is in. Just because he's trained, we have no idea whether he's close or whether he's not, and Eddie Howe's the last person to give any information. So that's that. Then you've got Livramento. If Trippier comes back into the side, does Livramento move to left back, or does Lewis Hall continue to play, etc., right? So you don't really want to be taking that risk. With Wilson's injury record, what if a little knock flares up and then he gets worse? Is he going to start? Where is he at personally? All these questions, and I think it's just not worth it. And even if you were to get Wilson, look at the hassle it would cause you. Is it worth it to take out Nicholas Jackson? Is it worth it to forego a Newcastle defender, which is imperative, not imperative, but at least very important in the structure of double game week bench boost squads? No, not really. So for me, those three would be avoids, and the top three on that list, that's where I'd look to go. I think the fixtures are all attacking orientated, as I've said, so we can be bullish on Isak and Gordon. Hopefully, maybe we get one Bayern clean sheet. I'm hoping that the Brighton fixture at home, they manage to pull it out of the bag. But apart from that, I wouldn't really look at the other three unless we get a conclusive judgment that Trippier is fit. If so, then I'd look at him. If not, maybe Livramento. But other than that, I don't think I'd go for Wilson. So we've spoken about the prioritization of assets such as Oscar Guardiola, Pedro Porro, Dan Burn, right? And the reason for that was because there wasn't so many good double game week defenders. So now we turn to the single game week options. And who could we potentially pick out from there that can really help our squad and improve it? Firstly and foremost, we've got Arsenal, and then we have a bit of Everton that we're going to come on to. Now, one of the reasons I'm more in favour of going for an Arsenal asset now is actually something completely unrelated to them, which is Bruno Fernandes' injury. And we saw on Monday night the effects that had on Man United, right? There was no one to really connect the play. There was no one to take the ball and take responsibility. And as such, with all the defensive injuries, it caused them a lot. Now, whilst going to Old Trafford isn't easy, I can imagine Arsenal going there, having a good amount of the ball, and being very intelligent with its usage and being very efficient with its use. And as a reason for that, I think Ben White might be a very good option here. If Arsenal are going to dominate the ball, they're going to create a lot of chances. And with United's defensive injuries, overloading them, for example, on one particular side, down the Saka, Odegaard, Ben White side, you can see Ben White making a lot of advancements into the final third because he won't have to protect against transition as much, depending on Rashford's fitness. That's one thing. And then he's so good and has been so good in the final third, for example, where he underlaps, overlaps, crosses, penetrative passes, all of those things, they're very useful. And then having Everton at home, which is a big deal, potentially gunning for the league title if City slip, I think with a high upside defender like Ben White, where there isn't so many elsewhere, and the reasons for his on the ball, activities are one of the reasons why I pick him over Gabriel. That's one reason why I think he could be a good asset. Then the other defender to consider, or other set of defenders to consider, are Arsenal's opponents in Game Week 38, and that is the Everton guys defensively, right? The only thing is, with the Everton guys, is obviously they have a very, very tough fixture in 38, so you wouldn't want to be using them for that. You'd be wanting to use them for, hopefully, just this week against Sheffield United, have a good home fixture. Branthwaite and Tarkowski, good aerial threats against a side that's really struggled from set pieces, and almost go from there and see what happens. But making sure that if you're picking an Everton asset, which is a fantastic selection for this week, it just doesn't cause you any problems in 38. Now, all we've done in this section so far is speak about the defensive assets which have game week fixtures. And that's all I think we need to do, because there are so many good double game week assets in the midfield and forward department that have very good fixtures. Jackson, Isak, Haaland, Gordon, De Bruyne, Foden, Son, Richarlison, Maddison, maybe even Højlund, Garnacho, etc., right? And there isn't a need to really force a single game week asset into our team or take that type of risk when there's such good upside with even the double game week differentials. Even someone like a Madueke or a Gross, for example, would be a really, really interesting differential in this period. So I think we should stay away from there. If you have the likes of Saka, honestly, I'd consider selling him for a double game week asset. For example, I'd much rather have Richarlison than Saka. I know I've waxed lyrical about Richarlison recently in this video, in the last video. I think he's such a good asset for this double game week. And obviously 2 returns against Spurs, that too in about half an hour off the bench. So I would really prioritize getting double game week assets up top and in the midfield. For the single game week assets, I think having one and probably only a maximum of one would be optimal. I don't really see the benefit in 2. I think between the likes of Porro, Guardiola, Burn, and then potentially another United one or a Chelsea one, depending on your structure, I think that should be enough for the single game week assets to only have one. Now we move on to captaincy, and he hasn't got a mention on here for some reason. I don't know how. I guess I've forgotten him because it's so obvious, right? He is the best captain option. Erling Haaland is the best captain option this week, from at least an objective lens. We face a Spurs side that have got a high line that can be exploited in numerous fashions, but most certainly by him running in behind, the combinations that City play, their sequences, their patterns of play, and all of that points to a game where there is huge upside for Haaland to haul, right? And then also, you've got Fulham away, and they were flying kites in training. Now, I'm not saying that means they're on the beach, but they could well be on the beach, right? They haven't really got too much to play for. So he's looked sharp as well. That's the other thing. Him and Man City in general, I think this is the sharpest they've looked all season right now. And you know what? Of course it is, because they did it last season. They turn up when it needs to be done, right? Obviously, the penalties against Real Madrid's a different case, and I'm only really wearing the jacket they won last night. I don't support them. I've got this shirt from the Bernabeu, so thought I'd wear it. But nonetheless, for me, a huge ceiling given the games he's got this week. And for me, the best option. But I understand that some of you will be chasing. So if you are chasing, here are 3 options to go for. So this is in order. I guess you could group Son and Isak, maybe even both as second place. They're very close, right? But for me, Palmer. Now, why? The image on the left shows you Brighton, right? And Brighton, in general, in terms of their attacking style of football, in terms of their man-to-man press, leave you a lot of space. But not only do they leave you a lot of space, which the likes of Palmer and Isak can exploit, and why I think there's grounds to be made. For example, you can make a case on those grounds for including them. But this is the way they build up. And the way they build up is very risky. This was a situation, for example, which Phil Foden profited off. City nicked the ball in their box and he scored, right? A very well taken finish, but nonetheless, Brighton their own architects of their own downfall. Okay, so with Palmer popping up and the amount of responsibility he has on the ball, with the amount he's going to get the ball, picking up those pockets of space, right, and then also on the counter press, there's a lot of opportunity for both him and Isak to return. I say more so Palmer because he just gets involved in the game a bit more. And the other screenshot on the right is Burnley against Newcastle this week. And you can see how on transition, given the way Burnley have some similarity to Brighton, how on transition you can get a numerical advantage or you can get isolated situations for your attackers. And our Son obviously plays them at home. And you can see Spurs scoring quite a few there. So the games that these guys have got at least facilitate the grounds for them to score some goals. So that's good, right? If you are going to go for a differential, at least you have a high ceiling. Now, the other games, obviously, Palmer's got Forest away, which won't be easy, but at times they are slightly fragile defensively, and he's in such good form. And maybe he still thinks he's got an outside chance of the Golden Boot. And he does if Haaland has an off week, then, you know, there's definitely some potential there. Not the easiest fixture, but not the worst fixture. Son pretty much always scores against City for obvious reasons on transition. They just have a few mistakes in them, City at times. Less so now that Pep's gone with 4 centre-backs, but still a possibility nonetheless, and it's at home, right? The only thing is he's playing left wing, so that definitely takes away from his effect in these type of games where occupying the centre-backs isn't required as much, but whereas he can probably be a bit more free, drop in and run in behind as more. Then Isak, the reason I've got him down at 3 is I just don't trust him enough to give him the armband ahead of someone like Palmer, where Isak's minutes, they'll be fine, they will, but just with Wilson returning, maybe knocks off a 20 here or there. And also, in general, Brighton and Man United are better sides than, for example, Brighton and Forest as a combination, right? So I trust Palmer a bit more with that. It's close, though. It is close, but I think it's very difficult to justify giving it to Isak because at least a midfielder will have, in general, more upside. Thank you very much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider subscribing and liking the video. I'd be very, very appreciative. Thank you very much. The videos will be coming every week, and they'll follow a similar pattern till the end of the season. But come next season, I'm going to be uploading more videos per week, and the whole production will just be improved. I just wanted to learn the reins, but camera quality, mic quality, quality of videos, graphics, analysis, information, etc., will all be improved. I did it with my threads, and I'm going to do it here. So just bear with me. I'll get through these next few weeks. I just wanted to learn the reins, but for next season, I'm taking it extremely, extremely seriously to make it the best I possibly can. So yeah. If you could like and subscribe again, that would be very, very much appreciated. May your points be abundant. Have a fantastic game week. And I shall see you very, very soon. Thank you and have a good week.